My name is Captain Ava Rostova. I'm 34, a U.S. Army intelligence officer at Fort Meade. I was just given my orders: neutralize a legendary Russian sleeper agent who went dark 30 years ago, living under the cover of a normal suburban housewife. But when I opened the classified file, my world fell apart. The target was my mother. She wasn't a traitor. She was coerced by Russian intelligence, her grandmother's life hanging in the balance. I took this truth to Colonel Miller, a man I once considered my mentor, and pleaded for a solution. He dismissed it out of hand. So I broke protocol, hacked into his secure files, and found out why. This entire mission was a setup. A brutal chess match he was playing against the CIA, with my family as the pawns. In his reports, my mother was a necessary sacrifice on his climb up the ladder. He made one fatal mistake. He bet my loyalty to the uniform would be stronger than my love for my family. He was wrong. He gave me the weapons, and now I'm going to use his own cruel lessons to burn down the entire career he built on the bones of my family. My world is built on whispers and shadows. I live in the quiet, sterile hum of a sensitive, compartmented information facility, a place buried deep in the heart of Fort Meade, Maryland. Here, the air tastes like recycled oxygen and strong coffee, and the only truth is the one you can verify 3 times over. For the United States Army, I am a weapon, an analyst whose mind is a map of Eastern Europe, etched with the dialects, politics, and secrets of a land my parents fled. My expertise is the Russian threat, the new, the old, and the ones that have been sleeping. The briefing room was cold, as always. The holographic map of the Baltimore-Washington metropolitan area glowed in the center of the table, a constellation of data points and surveillance zones. Colonel Miller stood at the head, his posture as rigid as the creases in his uniform. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, and his eyes missed nothing. "Captain Rostova," he began, his voice a low gravel that commanded attention. "I'm pulling you off the Baltic surveillance project. We have a more pressing matter. A ghost has woken up." He gestured to the screen where a file bloomed open. The codename was Persephone. "Persephone?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds mythic." "It is," Miller said, not a hint of a smile on his face. "A sleeper agent from the old Soviet Directorate S program, embedded so deep for so long we wrote them off as a Cold War relic, until 72 hours ago." My fingers flew across the tablet in front of me, absorbing the initial report. Financial transfers from a shell corporation in Cyprus to a dead-drop account. Coded signals broadcast on a shortwave frequency previously used by the SVR. A whisper of renewed activity. "Why now?" I murmured, thinking aloud. "After 30 years of silence?" "That's your job to find out," Miller stated flatly. "This isn't some hot-headed GRU cowboy. This is old school, patient, methodical, and completely invisible. The asset has just received new orders and a significant injection of funds. We need to know what that mission is, and we need to neutralize the asset before it's carried out. This is your baby, Ava. You have full priority. Choose your team." "I only need one," I replied. "Sergeant Chen," Miller nodded. "Good choice. He's a wizard. But know this, Captain, the Director of National Intelligence is breathing down my neck. The White House is aware. Failure is not an option on the menu. Find me this ghost." I walked out of the briefing room and went straight to the digital bullpen where my team worked. Sergeant Mark Chen was hunched over a keyboard, his face illuminated by lines of code. He was younger than me by a decade, a prodigy who saw the world not in people, but in data streams and security flaws. "Mark, pack it up," I said, standing beside his desk. "We've got a new assignment, Priority Alpha." He didn't even look up. "How alpha are we talking?" "Spill my coffee and run Alpha, or finish this line of code first Alpha?" "The kind where you don't even get to swallow the coffee you just spilled," I replied. He finally looked at me, a grin spreading across his face. "My favorite kind. What are we hunting?" "A ghost," I said, handing him my tablet. "Codename Persephone." We set up in a secure, isolated section of the facility, a room within a room that we called the crypt. For the next 2 days, we lived on caffeine and adrenaline. Mark dove into the digital ether, chasing the money. I immersed myself in the tradecraft, the psychology of a sleeper who had lived a lie for 3 decades. What kind of person could do that? What kind of life did they build as a cover? A quiet one, most likely. Normal, boring even, the kind of person you'd never look at twice. The first break came from Mark. "Got a hit on the withdrawal pattern," he announced, pointing to a highlighted section on his screen. "The money is being pulled out in small, untraceable cash increments, but the ATMs they're using are all within a 20-mile radius. concentrated in the suburbs between Baltimore and Annapolis. Narrow it down, I commanded, my eyes fixed on the map he projected onto the main screen. A cluster of red dots appeared. Whoever this is, they're disciplined, Mark said with grudging admiration. They're using different banks, different times of day, always in high-traffic areas. But there's a pattern in the chaos. They favor locations near public parks and libraries, classic dead-drop staging grounds. While Mark tracked the digital breadcrumbs, I focused on the human element. I pulled old KGB training manuals, CIA assessments of Directorate S agents who had been caught. They were masters of disguise, not in the theatrical sense, but in the art of utter normality. They became their cover stories. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was the one exception to the no personal devices rule in the crypt, a concession Miller made because he knew I was my mother's only family nearby. The screen read Mama. I stepped out into the secure corridor to answer it. Avushka, darling, are you eating? Her voice, thick with a Russian accent that 30 years in America had failed to erase, was a warm blanket on a cold day. Yes, Mama, I lied, my stomach growling. Just busy. You are always busy. A captain in the army, so important. But you are too thin, I made borscht. You should come for dinner on Sunday. I'll make your favorite with lots of dill. I smiled. My mother, Elena Rostova, was a woman whose entire universe revolved around her small garden, her kitchen, and me. She was a quintessential Russian babushka in the making, worried about my diet, my lack of a husband, and the draft from my apartment windows. She was soft and kind, with hands that smelled of flour and soil. I'll try, Mama. Work is intense right now. There is always a war somewhere for you, she sighed. What about Anya? Have you spoken to her? My grandmother. I called Babushka last week. She said the garden in Tula is beautiful this year. She complained about her arthritis as usual. She is old, Ava. Be patient. She worries about you. We both do. I'm fine, Mama. I promise. I have to go. I love you. I love you too, my little hawk, she said, using my childhood nickname. Eat something. I hung up and leaned against the cold wall, the conversation a brief, jarring visit to a world outside these concrete walls, a world of borscht and worried mothers. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the crypt, back to the world of ghosts and shadows. Anything? I asked Mark. I'm running facial recognition against surveillance footage from the ATMs, but the quality is garbage, he grumbled. Our ghost wears a hat, sunglasses, a scarf, it could be anyone, but I did find something else. Coded signal. It's an old-style numbers station broadcast, but the encryption is new. A hybrid of old one-time pad principles and modern quantum algorithms. It's beautiful and terrifying. Can you break it? Give me a week and a supercomputer, maybe. Give me right now? No chance, but I can triangulate the broadcast's origin. It's a low-power, localized transmission, designed to be picked up within a few city blocks. The last broadcast, 2 nights ago, originated from here. He pointed to a spot on the map. A quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in a suburb of Baltimore. My blood ran cold. I knew that neighborhood. Zoom in, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Cross-reference that with the ATM locations. Mark typed, his brow furrowed. Okay, 3 of the cash withdrawals were made within a 1-mile radius of the broadcast origin, and the location itself is Patterson Park. Patterson Park. The place my mother walked every morning. The place where I'd learned to ride a bike. It's a coincidence, I said, more to myself than to Mark. It's a big park, lots of people. Maybe, Mark said, but he could hear the tension in my voice. What's wrong, Captain? My mother lives 5 blocks from there, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The professional part of my brain was screaming at me, do not compromise the investigation. A fact is just a fact. But the other part, the daughter part, was a knot of ice in my stomach. Ava, Mark started, his expression softening. It's nothing, I cut him off. It's a coincidence. Let's focus on the intel. Is there any chatter from our Russian sources? Any hint of what this mission could be? Negative. The SVR is running silent on this. Whatever it is, it's a high-level, compartmented operation. We're blind. For the next 24 hours, I tried to push it out of my mind. I buried myself in the data, looking for any other connection, any other lead that would take me away from that blinking red dot on the map that was so close to my mother's house. But every thread we pulled only seemed to draw the net tighter around that quiet Baltimore suburb. The final piece of the puzzle, the one that shattered my world, came late on the 3rd night. We obtained a new piece of surveillance footage from a camera across the street from the most recent dead drop, a bench in Patterson Park. The resolution was terrible, a grainy, black-and-white image of a figure in a long coat leaving a newspaper. It's useless, I said in frustration, staring at the screen. You can't even tell if it's a man or a woman. Let me work my magic, Mark said, his fingers a blur on the keyboard. He isolated the image, running it through a series of sharpening and enhancement algorithms. I can't clean up the face, but maybe something else. He zoomed in on the figure's hand as it rested on the bench. The pixels were a blurry mess. Enhance sequence delta 4, he muttered to himself. The image sharpened fractionally, then again and again, and there on the figure's chest, hanging from a thin chain, was a small metallic glint. What is that? I leaned closer, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. A piece of jewelry, maybe, Mark said. Let me try a different filter. Isolate reflective surfaces. The image shifted. The glint resolved into a distinct shape. It was a locket. A small, silver, oval-shaped locket, engraved with a tiny nightingale. The air left my lungs. My vision tunneled until the only thing I could see was that tiny piece of jewelry on the screen. It was identical to the one I had given my mother for her 60th birthday 3 months ago. I had ordered it from a craftsman in Estonia. It was one of a kind, and it was hanging around the neck of a Russian sleeper agent. The world tilted. The sterile, humming air of the crypt suddenly felt thin, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. For a split second, my mind, a finely tuned instrument of logic and analysis, simply shut down. It rejected the data. The image on the screen was an anomaly, a corrupted file, an impossibility. My mother was Alina Rostova. She made jam from the berries in her garden. She hummed Russian folk songs while she kneaded dough. She cried during sad movies. She was not Persephone. She was not a ghost. She was my mother. Captain Ava, Mark's voice broke through the static in my head. He was looking at me, his usual cocky grin replaced by a look of concern. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. The irony was a physical blow. I straightened up, forcing the air back into my lungs, my training kicking in like a blast shield slamming down over my emotions. I had to control the scene. I had to control myself. It's nothing, I said, my voice sounding unnaturally calm, distant. The design. It's a common Slavic motif, a nightingale, it's a coincidence. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie the moment the words left my mouth. The craftsman had sent me the initial sketches. He had assured me the engraving was a unique composition based on my specific request. Mark frowned, unconvinced. A 1 in a million coincidence, then? The locket, the park, the broadcast location, it's all converging on this one small area. An area you said. I know what I said, Sergeant, I snapped, my tone sharper than I intended. I saw him flinch slightly and I immediately regretted it. He was just doing his job. He was being the brilliant analyst I'd chosen. I'm sorry, I'm just tired. This is a dead end. The image is too degraded to be used as primary evidence. Let's move on. I want you to refocus on the financials. Dig deeper into the Cyprus Corporation. Find out who's really behind it. I'm going to get some air. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the crypt, my steps measured and even. I didn't run. I walked, one foot in front of the other, down the long, white corridor, past the cipher-locked doors and the watchful eyes of the security cameras. I walked until I reached the exit, swiped my clearance, and stepped out into the humid Maryland night. The cool air did nothing to quench the fire in my chest. I got into my car, a nondescript government-issue sedan, and just drove. I had no destination. I just needed to move to put distance between myself and that glowing screen, between the captain and the daughter. Memories ambushed me in the darkness. My mother's face when I gave her the locket. The way her eyes, the same deep brown as mine, had filled with tears. Oh, Avushka, she had whispered, her fingers tracing the delicate engraving. A Solovy, a nightingale, to remind me of the songs from the old country. She had clasped it around her neck and had barely taken it off since. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Was it all a lie? Was that moment of tenderness just an act, part of a 30-year performance by a master of the craft? The thought was nauseating. My mind, desperate for an alternative, started to race through other possibilities. Was she being framed? Could the SVR have replicated the locket to deliberately mislead us, to compromise me? It was possible. A sophisticated psychological operation to neutralize a key analyst by turning them against their own family. It was exactly the kind of cruel, Byzantine play the SVR would make. It had to be that. It was the only explanation that didn't shatter the foundations of my life. I drove for an hour before turning back toward the base. My course was set. I couldn't trust the data anymore. Not completely. I had a compromised variable in the equation, my own life. I needed to investigate this myself, outside the official channels, before I presented any half-baked theories to Miller. I found him in his office, reviewing reports. He looked up as I entered, his expression impatient. Report, Captain. Sir, the asset is better than we thought. I began, choosing my words with surgical precision. They're clean, disciplined, and they seem to have an uncanny awareness of our digital surveillance methods. The electronic trail is getting us close, but I believe they're anticipating our moves. I think they may even be feeding us misleading signals. Miller leaned back, his fingers steepling under his chin. What are you proposing? I need to go into the field, I said. I want to conduct discreet, on-the-ground reconnaissance of the target area, no digital footprint, old-fashioned shoe leather and observation. If Persephone is as old school as we think, we need to be too. I want to see what the satellites can't. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes searching for any hint of weakness or deception. You think the ghost knows we're hunting it? I think the ghost knows someone is always hunting it. It's a state of being for an agent this deep. I want to leverage their potential arrogance. They won't be expecting a single analyst to be sitting in a coffee shop across the street, just watching. This is highly irregular, Rostova. You're a lead analyst, not a field agent. And I'm the lead expert on this target's psychological profile, I countered, my voice firm. Let me use that expertise. Give me 48 hours of operational latitude. If I find nothing, I'll come back here and we'll stick to the digital approach. But I have a gut feeling about this, Colonel, and my gut has never been wrong. He grunted, a sound of reluctant agreement. 48 hours. Don't get made, Captain, and don't disappoint me. I won't, sir. I left his office with a cold knot of dread and a sliver of relief. I had my window. Now I just had to pray I was wrong about what I would find. The next day was Sunday. I drove to my mother's house, not as a captain on a mission, but as a daughter coming for dinner. The little brick townhouse was exactly as it always was. The garden in the front was bursting with tomato plants and unruly rose bushes. The smell of garlic and baking bread hit me the moment I opened the door. Avushka. My mother enveloped me in a hug that felt both like a comfort and a betrayal. She was wearing a simple house dress and an apron dusted with flour. She looked soft, harmless. She looked like my mother. Hi, Mama, I said, forcing a smile. You look tired. I told you work too much. Come sit, dinner is almost ready. As she bustled around the kitchen, my eyes did a sweep of the room. It was an unconscious habit, a professional reflex. The layout, the exits, the potential hiding places. Everything was normal. Photos of me in my uniform on the mantelpiece, a stack of gardening magazines on the coffee table, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the counter. It was a perfect picture of a quiet, suburban life. So, I began, my tone deliberately casual as I sat at the small kitchen table. Anything new? How have you been feeling? The same as always, darling. My back aches when it rains, and Mrs. Gable next door talks too much about her cats. Very boring. She smiled at me over her shoulder. How is your very exciting, not boring job? The usual, staring at screens until my eyes hurt. I paused, then played my first card. Oh, I was thinking about your locket the other day. It's so beautiful. Are you wearing it? She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. She reached for her neck, then frowned. Oh no, the clasp was getting loose. I was so worried I would lose it. I took it to that little jeweler in the city, Mr. Chen's shop, to have it tightened. He is very good. I will get it back on Tuesday. A plausible explanation, a perfectly reasonable answer. A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it almost made me dizzy. I was wrong. It was a copy. She was being framed. It was all a sophisticated intelligence operation. That's smart, Mama. You wouldn't want to lose it. Never, she said, her eyes warm. It is my most precious gift. We ate dinner, the conversation flowing easily. She asked about my work in vague terms I could deflect. I asked about her garden. It was all so normal, so painfully, beautifully normal that I started to feel foolish. I was letting the paranoia of my job infect my life, seeing shadows where there were none. While she was clearing the plates, I excused myself. I'm just going to use the washroom upstairs. But I didn't go to the washroom. I went to the small spare bedroom she used as a study. It was neat, organized. A desk with bills and letters stacked in tidy piles. A bookshelf filled with Russian classics and American romance novels, nothing out of place. I was about to give up when my eyes fell on her bookshelf again. Tucked behind a thick volume of Tolstoy's War and Peace was a smaller, leather-bound book with no title on the spine. My heart began to pound. I pulled it out. It wasn't a book. It was a logbook, filled with neat columns of dates, times, and strings of numbers. It was a cipher ledger. My hands started to shake. I quickly put it back, making sure it was perfectly aligned. My mind was reeling. The locket could be explained. This could not. I forced myself to stay calm. I went downstairs to the basement, under the pretense of looking for the old photo albums. The basement was musty and filled with the clutter of a lifetime. Old furniture under white sheets, boxes of my childhood drawings. In the far corner, behind a stack of old tires, was a small metal workbench. And on it, partially covered by a canvas cloth, was a shortwave radio transceiver. It was an older model but well-maintained, a listening station. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. The locket wasn't a coincidence. The jeweler wasn't real. The borscht, the hugs, the worried phone calls, what part of it was real? What part of my mother was real? I went back upstairs, my face a mask of calm I didn't feel. I hugged her goodbye at the door, the gesture feeling hollow, a pantomime of a life I no longer recognized. "You will come back next week?" she asked, holding my hand. "Of course, Mama," I said. As I drove away, the truth settled in, cold and heavy as a block of concrete in my chest. I had come here hoping to prove my mother's innocence. Instead, I had found irrefutable proof of her guilt. My mission was to find a ghost. I had found her, but my orders were to neutralize the asset. How do you neutralize your own mother? The 48 hours Miller had given me felt like an eternity and no time at all. I returned to Fort Meade with the truth lodged in my throat like a shard of glass. Every report I wrote, every analysis I conducted, was a lie of omission. I pushed my team to chase phantom leads in Estonia and Cyprus, creating a smokescreen of activity while my mind worked feverishly on a separate, silent track. I was an analyst caught in her own intelligence paradox. The more I knew, the less I could say. Mark, bless his digitally obsessed heart, knew something was wrong. He kept shooting me concerned glances over the top of his monitor. "You've been quiet since you came back from your field trip," he said, rolling his chair over to my workstation. "Did you find something out there, or did the fresh air just fry your circuits?" "Just a dead end, Mark," I said, not meeting his eyes. "The target is more disciplined than we imagined. It feels like we're chasing a reflection in a mirror." "So, what's the plan, boss? Keep banging our heads against this digital wall?" "The plan is to wait," I said, the words tasting like ash. "A ghost can't stay invisible forever. They have a mission. Eventually, they'll have to do something that creates a ripple. We just have to be watching when it happens." It was the right operational answer. It was also a stall tactic. I was buying time I didn't have, for a reason I couldn't articulate. I was trying to solve two problems at once: how to stop Persephone and how to save my mother. And I was beginning to realize those two objectives might be mutually exclusive. My first call was to a contact I wasn't supposed to have. David Chen, a former agency case officer who had been my mentor at Fort Huachuca, the Army's intelligence school. He'd retired a few years ago under a cloud of bureaucratic disapproval, which meant he was either a burnout or he knew too much. I trusted him precisely because the system didn't. I met him at a dimly lit jazz bar in Baltimore, the kind of place where conversations were swallowed by the saxophone. He was older, grayer, but his eyes were as sharp as they'd ever been. "Ava Rostova," he said, a small smile playing on his lips as I sat down. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Or at least the part of it that speaks Russian." "Something like that, David," I said, getting straight to the point. "I need some advice, off the books." "My favorite kind of advice. What's the ghost story?" I laid it out for him in hypotheticals and vague terms, stripping away the personal details but keeping the core of the problem. "An old Directorate S asset, activated after 30 years. My command wants them neutralized, but there's a complication. A civilian complication." David swirled the ice in his glass. "There's always a civilian complication. Is the civilian a hostage, a target, leverage?" "Leverage," I said, the word feeling inadequate. "I think the asset is being coerced, forced back into the game against their will." "And you want to pull them out instead of putting them down," he surmised, his gaze steady. "That's a noble and incredibly stupid impulse, Ava. You know the rules. Once an asset is activated, they're live. They're a threat. Your job isn't to understand their motivation. It's to eliminate their capability. But what if eliminating their capability means collateral damage, unacceptable damage? There's no such thing as unacceptable damage in this line of work. There is only mission success or mission failure," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "But I can see this isn't a hypothetical for you. You're in it deep. So I'll give you the only advice that matters: find the leverage. Whatever they're using to control your asset, that's the key. Control the leverage, and you control the asset. It's the only move you have that isn't on the official mission roster." I left the bar with his words echoing in my head. Find the leverage. The SVR wouldn't reactivate a dormant agent after 3 decades without a very powerful reason. A threat. Something my mother valued more than her quiet life, more than her own safety. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the list of things she valued was very short. It was me. And it was her own mother, my grandmother, Anya, in Tula. That night, I went back to my apartment and did something I hadn't done in years. I made a secure, encrypted, and completely unauthorized call to Russia. Bouncing the signal through 3 different satellite relays, I called my grandmother's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then, a click. Not the familiar, crackly voice of my babushka, but an automated recording in Russian. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Ice flooded my veins. I immediately pulled up the satellite imagery of her small dacha outside Tula. The last image, from 3 days ago, was normal. Flowers in the garden, her old Lada parked in the drive. I tasked a priority update from a commercial satellite network, using an old access code from David. The new image came back an hour later. The car was gone. The front door of the dacha was slightly ajar. She was gone. They had her. That was the leverage. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. My mother wasn't a willing participant. She was a puppet, and the SVR was pulling the strings from thousands of miles away, holding her own mother's life in their hands. Her mission wasn't an act of aggression against the United States. It was a ransom. I had to tell Miller. I had to lay out the new intelligence, frame it in a way that would change the objective from neutralization to extraction. It was a long shot, but it was the only official path I had. I walked into his office the next morning, my report prepared, my argument rehearsed. He was on the phone, his back to me. I understand the director's impatience, sir, but the asset is careful. We're closing the net? Yes, Rostova is leading the task force. She's the best, but I'm keeping a very short leash on her. No, there's no risk of compromise. Her file is impeccable. She's Army through and through. Her family ties are a non-issue. He turned and saw me standing there. His face was a mask of professionalism, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He motioned for me to sit. That was the DNI, he said, hanging up. He wants a status update. What have you got for me, Captain? This was my chance. Sir, I have new intelligence that suggests a significant change in the asset's profile. I believe Persephone is not acting voluntarily. We have reason to believe they are being coerced, and that their mission may be related to a hostage situation involving a family member overseas. I laid out the evidence, carefully omitting how I obtained it. The sudden disconnection of her mother's phone, the anomaly at the dacha. I framed it as intelligence gathered from a confidential human source. Miller listened, his face unreadable. When I was finished, he was silent for a full minute. I could hear the clock on his wall ticking, each second a hammer blow against my hope. Finally, he spoke. Captain, your dedication is admirable, but your analysis is flawed. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Sir, this is actionable intelligence. What it is, he interrupted, his voice like ice, is a distraction. You're building a narrative based on scraps and speculation because you're frustrated with the lack of progress. You're humanizing the target. I need you to stop thinking of Persephone as a person and start thinking of them as a weapon system pointed at this country. Your job is to disarm it, not psychoanalyze it. But sir, if we can rescue the hostage, we are not in the business of rescuing Russian grandmothers, Captain, he thundered, his voice bouncing off the soundproof walls. We are in the business of national security. Persephone has been given a mission. We don't know what it is, but we know it was important enough to wake a 30-year sleeper. It could be an assassination. It could be sabotage of critical infrastructure. It could be the theft of weapons-grade intelligence. I will not risk that. I will not risk American lives on the faint hope that a KGB-trained agent has suddenly developed a conscience. He stood up, his towering frame casting a shadow over his desk. Your theory is noted and dismissed. Your orders have not changed. Find Persephone. Identify the mission, and give me a neutralization plan. Is that understood? Colonel, is that understood, Captain Rostova? The words caught in my throat. This was it, the moment of truth. My loyalty to the uniform versus my love for my family. He was blocking my only official route. He was forcing my hand. Yes, sir, I said, my voice hollow. Understood. I walked out of his office in a daze. He wasn't just dismissing my theory. He was actively ignoring it. Why? The logic didn't track. A coerced asset is a predictable asset. An extraction operation, while complex, was a standard play. Unless the mission itself wasn't the point. Unless the point was simply catching the spy. The thought struck me with the force of a physical impact. Miller's ambition. The DNI breathing down his neck. The White House being aware. Capturing a legendary Directorate S-sleeper agent would be a career-making coup. A live agent, one they could interrogate, parade in front of the intelligence community. That was a much bigger prize than a dead one. But a coerced agent, one whose actions were mitigated by a hostage situation, that narrative was messy. It was complicated. It didn't make for a clean, triumphant press release. He wasn't just my superior officer. He was a politician in uniform, and he was providing me with the information he wanted me to have, the leads he wanted me to follow. He was the one who had given me the Persephone file in the first place. He was the one pushing the neutralization angle so hard. I went back to the crypt, my mind racing. I sat down at my terminal and pulled up the original intelligence file on Persephone, the initial tip-off. Where had it come from? It was listed as originating from a high-level source within the SVR, a source codenamed Icarus. A source Miller managed directly. Miller wasn't just my boss. He was the source. He was feeding me the intelligence. He was shaping the entire investigation from the inside out. He wasn't trying to stop a mission. He was trying to catch a spy. And he didn't care what happened to the hostage. He was using my mother, and by extension me, as a pawn in his own game for promotion. He knew about my mother. He had to. He had chosen me for this assignment for a reason. He was using me to hunt my own mother. The realization hit me with the force of a physical shock. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked around the crypt, at the humming servers and the glowing screens, and it no longer felt like a sanctuary of truth. It felt like a cage, meticulously designed by Colonel Miller, with me as the main exhibit. He hadn't chosen me for my expertise. He had chosen me for my vulnerability. He had handed me a loaded gun and pointed it at my own family, counting on my loyalty, my training, and my ambition to make me pull the trigger. My hands trembled as I navigated through the secure network, my mind racing faster than my fingers. I couldn't confront him. A direct accusation would be professional suicide. He would bury me in a mountain of classified protocols, paint me as a compromised, emotionally unstable agent, and have me removed from the investigation in a heartbeat. I would be discredited, silenced, and my mother would be left to her fate. No, I couldn't go through him. I couldn't go around him. I had to go under him. I had to operate in the shadows he himself had created. "Mark," I called out, my voice low and urgent, "I need you, top-level secrecy. This does not leave this room, not a whisper, not a keystroke that can be logged." He rolled his chair over, his expression serious. He knew my tones of voice. This was a new one. "What's up, Ava? You look like you're about to go to war with the entire chain of command." "Close," I said grimly. "I think the Persephone investigation is compromised. Not by the Russians, by us. I think Miller is playing a game and we're the pieces on the board. I need you to do something for me that is highly illegal and could get us both sent to Leavenworth for a very long time." Mark didn't even blink. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Just tell me who to hack." "Colonel Robert Miller," I said. "I want everything." His secure emails, his encrypted call logs, his private network traffic. Specifically, I want to know everything about his confidential source, Icarus. I think Icarus isn't a Russian source. I think Icarus is Miller himself, feeding us curated intel. I need you to prove it. A slow grin spread across Mark's face. "Hacking a full bird, Colonel? Oh, this is better than my birthday. But Ava, if you're wrong about this..." "I'm not," I said with a certainty that surprised even myself. "I'm not wrong." While Mark began his perilous digital deep dive, I had my own mission. I needed to make contact with my mother, not as her daughter, but as a handler. I had to get inside her operational loop, understand her mission, and find a way to subvert it without alerting her SVR controllers or Miller. I drove back to her neighborhood that night, parking 3 blocks away. I was no longer Ava Rostova, the daughter. I was a field agent conducting surveillance. I watched her house from the shadows of a sycamore tree, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I saw her move past the window, a solitary figure in the warm glow of her living room lamp. She looked smaller, more fragile than I remembered. Was she afraid? Was she thinking of her own mother, a prisoner in a land she had escaped? I couldn't just walk up to the door. I had to assume the house was bugged. I had to assume she was being watched. I needed a method of communication that was clean, untraceable, and relied on a language only we would understand. Growing up, my mother and I had a game. We would leave each other notes using a simple substitution cipher based on our favorite book, Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. It was a silly, childish game, a secret language between a mother and her bookish daughter. Now, it was going to be our lifeline. The next morning, I went to Patterson Park. It was a crisp autumn day, and the park was full of joggers and dog walkers. I found the bench from the surveillance footage, the dead drop location. I sat down, opened a copy of the Baltimore Sun, and pretended to read. Tucked inside the classified section was a small, folded piece of paper. I used a dab of adhesive to stick it to the underside of the wooden slat, a place no one would think to look. The note was short, written in our code. The nightingale is in a cage. They are listening. The master knows. Can you hear him? The master knows. It was our old signal. It meant we are not safe, but I am with you. The rest was a test. If she was the agent I believed her to be, coerced but still brilliant, she would understand. For 2 days, I lived on a razor's edge. Mark worked in silence, his face a mask of concentration, the only sound the soft click of his keyboard. I performed my duties at Fort Meade, a hollowed-out version of myself, presenting meaningless progress reports to Miller, watching his eyes for any sign of suspicion. He revealed nothing. He was as calm and controlled as ever. On the 3rd day, I went back to the park. My heart was pounding as I walked toward the bench. I sat down, my hand casually brushing the underside. It was there. A tiny, folded piece of paper, held in place by a piece of chewing gum. I waited until I was back in the lead-line security of my car before I opened it. The handwriting was shaky, but the code was perfect. He took her from the dacha. They want the Archimedes files. The exchange is in 3 days. The port. He will call with the time. I have no choice, Avushka, Archimedes. My blood ran cold. The Archimedes files weren't just intelligence. They were the master key to the kingdom. It was a theoretical project I had worked on 2 years ago, a comprehensive analysis of the strategic vulnerabilities in Russia's command and control infrastructure. It detailed potential weaknesses in their satellite communications, their nuclear launch protocols, their entire defense network. In the wrong hands, it wasn't just a security risk. It was a potential casus belli, a trigger for war. The SVR wasn't just ransoming a grandmother, they were trying to steal the blueprint for a decapitation strike against their own country. This was bigger and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. And then I saw the last word, Avushka, my little hawk. It was a sign-off, but it was also a plea. She was telling me she was still my mother. Just as I was processing the note, my phone rang. It was Mark. Ava, get back here. Now, he said, his voice tight with excitement. I broke through his firewall. You are not going to believe what I found. I raced back to the crypt, my mind a whirlwind of Archimedes and coded messages. Mark had the evidence displayed on the main screen. It was a series of encrypted emails between Miller's private account and an IP address in Langley, Virginia. The CIA. Miller isn't just running an intel op, Mark explained, his words coming in a rush. He's running a counterintel op against the agency. Read this. He pointed to a decoded message. It was a report from Miller to a deputy director at the CIA. Subject: Operation Icarus Update Asset Persephone has been successfully activated by SVR. The bait hostage was taken as predicted. The target package is Archimedes. My internal lead, Rostova, is performing as expected, though showing predictable signs of emotional conflict. She is unaware of the broader strategic objective. We are letting the SVR play out their hand. Once the files are transferred, we will intercept the SVR handler and recover the package. The operation will expose the SVR's network in the region and give us leverage over their European desk. Rostova's mother is an acceptable and necessary loss. I read the last sentence again. Acceptable and necessary loss. The air was knocked from my lungs. This was never about catching a spy for a promotion. This was a brutal, high-stakes game between the Army and the CIA, and my mother was the pawn they were sacrificing. Miller wasn't just using me to hunt her. He was using my Archimedes project as bait to expose an SVR network, and he was fully prepared to let my mother be executed or imprisoned by the Russians to achieve his goal. He had handed me this case knowing I was the author of the target files, creating a perfect, closed loop of betrayal. He's selling her out to the agency for a win, Mark whispered, his face pale. This is monstrous. I stared at the screen, the words blurring through a haze of rage and grief. Miller hadn't just betrayed his oath. He had betrayed my trust, my service, my family. He had turned me into an unwitting executioner. But as the rage crested, something else took its place. A cold, hard clarity. The kind of clarity I felt right before an exam, when all the variables finally made sense. Miller had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated me. He saw me as a daughter, conflicted and emotional. He saw me as a pawn. He had forgotten that I was also a captain in the United States Army Intelligence Corps. I was an expert in this game, and I was done playing by his rules. Mark, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Wipe every trace of your hack. Make it look like you were never there. Then I need you to build me a ghost, a new identity. A legend, a backstory, and a clean set of credentials. I need to get into the port of Baltimore in 3 days, and I can't go in as Captain Rostova. He looked at me, a slow, determined grin spreading across his face. Who do you want to be? I want to be the person who buys the Archimedes files from the Russians, I said. It's time to crash their party. And Miller's. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. The crypt, once a sterile environment for analyzing threats, became the incubator for a treasonous, desperate, and righteous plan. We were no longer just analysts. We were conspirators fighting a two-front war against our enemies and our own command. Okay, Katerina Beck, Mark said, spinning in his chair. It was the dawn of the first day. He hadn't slept. Born in Zurich to a German diplomat and a French art historian, educated at the London School of Economics. A polyglot, a prodigy, and a pariah, kicked out of the legitimate financial world for unethical data acquisition. Now she's a freelancer, a ghost who buys and sells secrets on the dark web for cryptocurrency. She has no allegiances, only a price. He had built her from scratch, a digital life woven from thin air. Katerina had a Swiss bank account with a complex transaction history, a recently expired lease on a flat in Monaco, and a faint, almost untraceable social media footprint that suggested a life of quiet, transient luxury. He even created a legend of her past work, planting whispers on encrypted forums about a data broker who had sold corporate secrets in the past. She's perfect, Mark, I said, studying the flawless digital dossier. She's exactly the kind of shark the SVR would be both wary of and willing to deal with. Now for the bait, he said, turning to another screen. The Archimedes files. I couldn't hand over the real data. That would be a catastrophic breach of national security, an act of treason I wasn't willing to commit, even for my mother. Instead, I had spent the night creating a masterpiece of deception, a Trojan horse. The file structure is a perfect replica of the original, I explained, pointing to the lines of code. It has the right file sizes, the right encryption markers, everything. The first few layers of data are real, low-level analyses of Russian naval patrols, enough to pass a superficial check. But the core of the file, the real meat, that's the trap. What kind of trap? Mark asked, leaning in, his eyes gleaming with professional curiosity. 2 parts, I said. First, a silent, quantum-encrypted tracking beacon. The moment the core file is accessed on any network, it will ping us with its exact geographic coordinates. Second, a logic bomb. It's tied to a geofenced parameter. If the file is opened anywhere outside of a 50-mile radius of Tula, Russia, where my grandmother is, the entire data package will instantly and irrevocably corrupt itself into terabytes of useless digital noise. It's a dead man's switch. Mark let out a low whistle. You're giving them a file that is both a tracker and a self-destructing ransom note. That's diabolical. I love it. While Mark fortified Katerina Beck's digital existence, I made my move. I returned to Patterson Park, a different woman this time, not a worried daughter, but a handler with a plan. I left a new message under the bench, the coded text a lifeline of dangerous instructions. Margarita will meet a new master, not the one you expect, a woman. Give her the manuscript with the flawed chapter. She will know which one, trust her. The nightingale will sing again, the manuscript with the flawed chapter, the Trojan horse file. It was a risky instruction, relying on my mother's ability to understand the subtext, to make the switch from the real data, which the SVR had likely instructed her on how to access, to the corrupted version I would provide. I was betting her life and my grandmother on a secret language from my childhood. The next step was managing Miller. I had to keep him looking in the wrong direction. I requested a formal meeting, striding into his office with a look of determined focus. Sir, I've developed a new lead, I said, laying a falsified report on his desk. We've intercepted fragmented communications that suggest the SVR handler for Persephone is not in the Baltimore area. I believe the dead drops are a feint. The real command and control is coming from a listening post in Annapolis, likely near the Naval Academy to blend in with the high volume of signal traffic. I had Mark create the fragmented communications. They were a digital illusion, just convincing enough to be plausible. Miller reviewed the report, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He thought I was being a good little soldier, chasing the breadcrumbs he'd approved. Annapolis? That's good work, Captain. Smart. Focus your team's resources there. I want every surveillance asset we have pointed at that city. Find me that handler. Yes, sir, I said, the words feeling like acid. We'll find him. I was sending him on a ghost hunt of my own creation. It would keep his eyes off the Port of Baltimore for the critical window I needed. My final stop was to see David Chen. I met him not in a bar, but in a dusty, forgotten warehouse down by the rail yards, a place that smelled of rust and decay. He didn't ask questions when I called, he just gave me a time and a place. "You've got that look in your eye, Ava," he said as I approached. "The one right before an officer decides to burn the rulebook and write their own." "I need gear, David. Untraceable, non-regulation. I'm going into a situation and I can't leave a military signature." He nodded slowly, leading me to a heavy steel footlocker. He opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, was a Sig Sauer P320 pistol, a compact set of lockpicks, an encrypted satellite phone, and a tiny, flesh-colored communications earpiece. "This is a one-way ticket to a court-martial, you know," he said quietly, handing me the weapon. It felt heavy, cold, and final in my hand. "I know," I replied. "Whatever you're walking into, it's a kill box. The SVR on one side and whoever you're hiding from on our side on the other. You're putting yourself in the crossfire." "It's the only place to be," I said. "Thank you, David, for everything. Just come back in one piece, Rostova," he grunted, "and try not to start World War III. The night of the exchange was cold and damp. A thick fog rolled in off the Chesapeake Bay, blanketing the Port of Baltimore in a shroud of gray. It was perfect. I stood in front of the mirror in a cheap motel room miles from the port. Captain Ava Rostova was gone. In her place was Katerina Beck. My hair, usually tied in a severe military bun, was down, colored a shade darker. I wore a tailored black coat, practical but expensive looking. My face was pale, my expression a carefully constructed mask of cold indifference. I was no longer an analyst. I was a predator. The Trojan horse file was on a hardened, encrypted drive the size of a thumbnail in my pocket. The satellite phone David had given me was in another. The pistol was strapped to my ankle, hidden by my trousers. I checked my reflection one last time. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were my eyes, but they held a different fire. Not the fire of a soldier following orders, but of a daughter refusing to sacrifice her family on the altar of someone else's ambition. A text message vibrated on the burner phone, an untraceable number. A single message. 11 p.m., Pier 4. Come alone. It was time. I took a deep breath, the cold motel air filling my lungs. I thought of my mother, of my grandmother, of the 30 years of lies and the lifetime of love that had led us to this moment. I thought of Colonel Miller, sitting in his office, confidently watching a phantom in Annapolis. He thought he was in control of the game. He had no idea I was about to flip the entire board. Captain Rostova was an asset, an acceptable loss. Katerina Beck was a variable he had never planned for, and she was going to burn his entire operation to the ground. The Port of Baltimore at night is a sleeping iron giant. The skeletal arms of cranes reached into the foggy sky, and the silence was broken only by the mournful groan of a distant foghorn and the slap of water against the pier. Pier 4 was at the far end of the industrial complex, a dark, isolated stretch of concrete lined with stacks of shipping containers that formed a maze of steel canyons. It was a perfect place for secrets to be exchanged or for people to disappear. I moved through the shadows, a ghost in my own right. My senses, honed by years of training, were on high alert. The smell of saltwater and diesel, the creak of a mooring rope, the distant rumble of the city. I was Katerina Beck now. Cold, professional, here for a transaction. But underneath the facade, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw them from a distance. Two figures standing near the end of the pier. One was small, bundled in a dark coat. My mother. Even from 100 yards away, I recognized her posture, the slight slump of her shoulders. The other was a tall man, broad and imposing. He stood with the stillness of a predator, the SVR handler. My earpiece, a direct, untraceable line to Mark, crackled to life. It was a listening-only link. I couldn't respond, but he could feed me information. "Okay, Ava, I'm in," his voice whispered, a ghost in my ear. "I'm patched into the port's security cameras. I have eyes on you. I see your two friends, no sign of anyone else. Miller's tactical team is still focused on Annapolis. The playground is all yours for now." I walked forward, my footsteps echoing on the damp concrete. I let the sound announce my arrival. No surprises. I was a buyer, not an assassin. As I got closer, the handler turned. His face was sharp, angular, with pale, watchful eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He looked like a man who had spent a lifetime in the cold. "You are the woman they call Katerina?" he asked in Russian, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I am," I replied in flawless, unaccented Russian, my tone as cold as his. And you must be the man who sells fairy tales. Do you have the manuscript? He gave a slight, humorless smile. Direct, I like that. I am Victor, and I have what you came for. But first, the payment. The payment will be transferred the moment I have verified the authenticity of the data, I said, holding up a small, encrypted data pad. My reputation is built on discretion and trust. I trust no one. I looked past him at my mother. Her face was pale in the dim light, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Recognition? Confusion? She was staring at me, at this stranger who looked like her daughter but sounded like the enemy. Mama, I said, switching to English, my voice softening just a fraction, a calculated risk. It's okay. Victor's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. What did you say? I replied, my Russian turning to ice once more. Tell your asset to transfer the file. We are wasting time. My mother's eyes locked with mine. In that moment, across the cold, damp space that separated us, I saw the message pass between us. The manuscript with the flawed chapter. She understood. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She pulled a small, ruggedized laptop from her bag. Her hands were shaking as she typed. File transfer initiated, Victor said, watching his own device. It will take 2 minutes. While we wait, a question. Why Archimedes? What does a freelance data broker want with a file that could start a war? The people who hire me do not care about starting wars, I lied smoothly. They care about ending them before they begin. For a price. Information is the new currency, Victor, and this file is the central bank. A philosopher, he sneered. A capitalist, I corrected. Transfer complete, my mother whispered, closing the laptop. Victor checked his device. The file is secure, now the payment. One moment, I said, tapping at my data pad. I was running a diagnostic on the file she had sent. The outer layers were perfect. The low-level naval patrol data was there. The trap was set. My earpiece crackled again. Ava, we have a problem, Mark's voice was tense. Big problem. A car just entered the port access road. Black sedan, government plates, it's not one of ours. It has to be Miller's CIA friends. He must have had a backup surveillance team. He played you. My blood ran cold. Miller. He never trusted my Annapolis feint completely. He had a secret team in place, an ace up his sleeve to make sure he could snatch his prize. They would wait for the transaction to complete, then move in to grab Victor, the file, and my mother. An acceptable and necessary loss. I had seconds to act. The file appears to be in order, I said to Victor, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. But I have a new condition. Victor stiffened. We had an agreement. Agreements change when circumstances change, I said, my eyes flicking toward the dark maze of shipping containers. I am not just buying the data. I am buying the agent. He stared at me, dumbfounded. What? Her, I said, nodding toward my mother. Her contract with you is terminated. She comes with me. That is the price for my silence. Otherwise, our deal is off, and I will leak to the world that the SVR is so incompetent they let their most valuable intelligence be intercepted by a freelance broker. It would be embarrassing for your superiors in Yasnevo. I saw the conflict in his eyes. His orders were to retrieve the file and terminate the asset. My offer was a complication, but it was also a way for him to complete his primary mission without a messy cleanup. Before he could answer, a spotlight cut through the fog, pinning us in its bright, merciless glare. SVR, drop your weapons, you are surrounded. A voice boomed through a megaphone. 2 black sedans screeched to a halt at the end of the pier, disgorging a half-dozen men in dark tactical gear, rifles raised. Miller's CIA team. They were early. My bluff had forced their hand. Victor reacted instantly. He grabbed my mother, pulling her in front of him as a shield and drawing a pistol in one fluid motion. Get back, he roared in Russian. Get back or she dies. My world narrowed to a single, horrifying tableau. My mother, a human shield, Victor, a desperate professional, and a CIA team ready to open fire. This was Miller's endgame. This was the kill box. Mark! I hissed into my comms, which were for listening only. I was on my own. I had to rewrite the script. Now, Victor, I shouted in Russian, taking a step forward, my hands raised. This is not your enemy. This is an internal American affair. They are not here for you. They are here for the file. I was gambling that the CIA team's primary objective, as laid out by Miller, was to recover Archimedes. They want to erase this transaction, I yelled. If you shoot, you give them exactly what they want. You will be a loose end they can clean up. I saw a flicker of hesitation in Victor's eyes. He knew I was right. A firefight would be chaotic, unpredictable. I turned to my mother. Mama, I said, my voice dropping, speaking in our old language of home. On my signal, the master will send a sign, fall. Then I switched back to the cold, commanding voice of Katerina Beck, shouting at the CIA team in perfect English. "Stand down, I am a Swiss national. This is a legitimate business transaction. Your actions are a violation of international protocol." It was a ridiculous bluff, but I needed to create chaos, confusion. I needed to break their script. The team leader, a grim-faced man in his 50s, shouted back, "Last chance, release the hostage." This was it. The moment the chessboard flipped. "Now, Mama," I screamed. My mother, bless her KGB training and her mother's heart, didn't hesitate. She dropped, collapsing to the ground, pulling Victor off balance for a split second. It was all the time I needed. I dropped to one knee, drawing the Sig Sauer from my ankle in a single, fluid motion. I didn't aim for Victor. I didn't aim for the CIA team. I aimed for the spotlight. I fired twice. The first shot shattered the bulb, plunging the pier into near-total darkness. The second shot I sent into a stack of metal barrels nearby, creating a deafening clang that echoed through the port. "Mark, now," I screamed, knowing he couldn't hear me but praying he was watching. As if on cue, half the lights in the port went out. Mark, he had hacked the port's power grid. He had plunged us into chaos. In the disorienting darkness and confusion, I ran. I grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her up. "Come on." Victor, disoriented, fired a shot into the darkness where the CIA team had been. They returned fire. The air was filled with the deafening roar of automatic weapons. "This way," I yelled, pulling my mother into the labyrinth of shipping containers. We were in the crossfire. Bullets ricocheted off the steel walls around us, whining like angry insects. We ran deeper and deeper into the maze, the sounds of the firefight fading slightly behind us. My mother was surprisingly fast, agile. The years of quiet suburban life hadn't completely erased the woman she used to be. We found cover behind a massive container, our breath coming in ragged gasps. "Ava," she gasped, her eyes wide in the gloom. "What is happening? Who are those men?" "They're my colleagues," I said grimly. "And they're here to kill us both. Welcome back to the Cold War, Mama." The sound of boots on gravel was getting closer. They were hunting us. Victor was a professional. He would be hunting us too. We were trapped between two armies in a maze of our own making. "They won't stop hunting," my mother whispered, her voice trembling but laced with an old, familiar steel. "Victor's orders will be to retrieve the package and eliminate the witnesses. Your people. They will have the same objective." "I know," I said, reloading my pistol with a spare magazine. The metallic click was unnervingly loud in the sudden quiet. The initial firefight had died down, replaced by a tense, waiting silence. They were regrouping, spreading out, turning the container yard into a hunting ground. But they're operating on a flawed premise. They think the file is the prize. They're wrong. We are. My earpiece crackled. "Ava," Mark's voice was a lifeline. "They're communicating on a scrambled, tactical frequency. I'm trying to break in, but it's CIA grade. Tough. But I can see their heat signatures on the security cams. You have a two-man team moving down aisle 4 to your east. Another is circling around from the west. And a third, oh hell. Victor is on top of the containers, moving parallel to you. He's stalking you from above. Trapped. Pinned down from 3 sides. My mind, the analyst's mind, processed the variables. They were using a classic pincer movement. Standard tactical procedure. Predictable, and predictable was exploitable. "Mama," I said, my voice low and urgent. "Do you remember the stories Babushka used to tell us about the partisans in the forests of Smolensk?" She looked at me, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "They never fought the battle the Germans expected. They made the forest their weapon." "Exactly," I said. "We're going to make this forest our weapon." I pulled her deeper into the maze, away from the approaching teams. We moved silently, our steps muffled by the damp ground. This was my mother's world, the world of shadows and tradecraft she had left behind, and it was coming back to her. She moved with a grace and awareness that surprised me. She pointed to a loose cable, a patch of oil on the ground, small details a civilian would miss but a trained operative would see as a tool or a trap. "Mark," I whispered, hoping he could still hear me through the comms built into the earpiece. "I need a diversion, a big one, at the north end of the yard near the main gate. Can you do it?" A pause. Then, "Does a drone pilot love remote-controlled chaos? Give me 60 seconds." We found a choke point, a narrow gap between 2 towering stacks of red containers. It was the only way through on this side. I handed my mother the empty pistol magazine. "When you hear the boom," I said, "throw this as hard as you can down that aisle to the west. It'll make them think we went that way, then we go east. Fast." She nodded, her expression grim but determined. We waited. The 60 seconds felt like a lifetime. I could hear the scuff of boots getting closer. Then, a massive explosion rocked the port, a deep, percussive boom that echoed through the steel canyons. A blossom of orange fire lit up the foggy sky to the north. Mark. He had likely overloaded a power transformer. A brilliant, beautiful madman. In the instant of shocked silence that followed, my mother threw the magazine. It clattered against a steel wall 50 yards to the west. As predicted, I heard the shouts of the CIA team, their footsteps changing direction, moving toward the sound. "Go!" I hissed. We sprinted east into the darkness, into the unknown. We were buying ourselves minutes, nothing more. "Mark, where, Victor?" I panted as we ran. "Still on the containers," came the reply. "He didn't fall for the diversion. He's moving toward your position. He's faster than they are. He knows you're the real target." We ducked behind another stack of containers just as Victor's shadow passed over us. He was moving like a panther, silent and deadly. He was hurting us, cutting off our escape to the main part of the port. He was pushing us toward the water, the pier. It was our only way out. We broke from the containers and made a mad dash for the open space of Pier 4. The fog was thicker here, clinging to the water. "There!" Victor's voice roared from behind us. A gunshot cracked the air. I felt a searing pain in my left shoulder and I stumbled, falling to one knee. My mother pulled me up, her strength surprising me. "I'm okay," I gasped, though my arm was on fire. "Keep moving." We reached the end of the pier. Behind us, Victor was closing in. To our right, the CIA team was emerging from the container maze. We were cornered, a dead end. "It's over, Alina," Victor called out, his footsteps slowing, confident. "You were a good soldier once. Don't die like a traitor." I looked at my mother. Her face was set. She wasn't looking at Victor. She was looking at me, and beyond me at the dark, churning water of the bay. "A mother will always protect her child," she said in Russian, her voice full of a love so fierce it burned away the fog. "It is the only mission that ever truly mattered." And then she did something I never expected. She turned to face Victor and the approaching CIA team. "You want Archimedes?" she shouted, her voice ringing with defiance. She held up the ruggedized laptop. "Here it is," and she threw it, not to them, but into the black water. It disappeared with a soft splash, taking Miller's prize and the SVR's weapon with it. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Victor, the CIA team. They stared at the spot where the laptop had vanished, their expressions a mixture of shock and fury. In that moment of stunned inaction, I acted. I pulled my mother toward the edge of the pier. "Trust me," I said, and together we jumped. The icy water was a shock to the system, stealing my breath. It was a baptism, washing away the lies, the betrayals, the shadows. We surfaced, gasping in the cold, dark water. Above us, on the pier, there was shouting, chaos. But down here, hidden by the fog and the darkness, we were free. We swam, my good arm pulling us away from the pier, toward the pilings of a neighboring dock. It was a grueling swim, the pain in my shoulder a constant, throbbing fire. But the woman beside me, the quiet suburban gardener, swam with a strength that belied her age. We clung to a rusted ladder, shivering in the darkness, listening as the sounds of the hunt faded into the night. We had survived. The weeks that followed were a blur of shadows and safe houses, a life lived on the run, orchestrated by the ghosts of David Chen's past and the digital wizardry of Mark Chen. We became ghosts ourselves. Mark wiped every trace of us, creating a legend that Captain Rostova had been killed in the firefight, a tragic casualty in a classified operation gone wrong. Colonel Miller got his wish. I was an acceptable loss. His operation was a catastrophic failure, the Archimedes file lost forever. I knew, without a doubt, that the internal investigation would be brutal. He had gambled and lost, and the house always wins. My mother and I, we found our way to a small, quiet town in the Pacific Northwest, a place of tall trees and misty mornings. We had new names, new identities. Alina became Anna. I became Maria. We were just two women, a mother and a daughter, with a quiet past. One morning, months later, we were sitting on the porch of our small rented cabin, watching the sun burn the mist off the mountains. My shoulder had healed, leaving a puckered scar that was a permanent reminder of the night we were reborn. "Do you miss it?" I asked her. "Your garden, your house?" She thought for a moment, sipping her tea. "I miss the roses," she said finally. But the roses were growing in a prison, Avushka. I did not realize it until the walls came down. This is freedom. The Trojan horse file had worked. 3 days after the firefight, Mark had received a single, encrypted ping. The location, a small dacha outside Tula, Russia, the SVR had kept their word. My grandmother was home. The logic bomb in the file was their guarantee of our silence. It was a truce born from mutual destruction. My path was no longer in uniform. My war was over. But a new purpose had taken root. I had seen how easily systems could be corrupted by ambition, how quickly human lives could become footnotes in a classified report. My work now wasn't about serving a flag, it was about serving the truth. I began to write, to document, to consult for organizations that held the powerful accountable. My mother found her peace in a small plot of land behind our cabin, where she planted new roses. She never spoke of her 30 years of silence, and I never asked. Her actions on that pier had said everything I ever needed to know. The love was real. That had never been part of the cover story. Sometimes, I look at the scar on my shoulder and remember the woman I was, the dedicated captain, the loyal soldier. I was proud of her. But I am more proud of the woman I became. The daughter who refused to let her family be a statistic, the operative who wrote her own rules, the survivor who learned that true loyalty isn't to a system or a command, but to the people you love. My world is no longer built on whispers and shadows. It's built on the quiet strength of a morning sun, the resilience of a rose garden, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her little hawk. We found our way out of the cold, not by winning the war, but by simply refusing to fight it on anyone's terms but our own. And in that, we found a victory more profound than any medal or commendation. We found peace.